Well, hello everyone. This is the IPVM community call for October. Um, we'll do I guess go through the updates. I think probably the first big set of updates, Brooks. It's not only that you gave a talk today, but you've been working on specs nonstop, and obviously IPVM is a greater whole, has a lot of tie-in with specifications. So maybe you want to talk about the breakup of all the different UCAN specific ones, and yeah.
Yeah, we decided to push forward to a 1.0 for UCAN specs. We knew for a really long time that we wanted to break those up so that we'd have, for higher ceilings, right? Delegations and invocations and, all of these things broken out separately. Ran into, unsurprising, a little second system syndrome, right? Where we're like, yeah, we want one of these and one of these and the phony, and but I think this is basically all tied off now. Some open debate about if this should be a 1.0 or 0.11, happening behind the scenes, fine. One of the really nice things about this, though, is it's forced us to clarify, and we've made a couple changes that make it easier to reason about parts of the semantics. And while thinking this through and adding a bunch of diagrams, because now we have the space on each of these to add, mermaid diagrams as we go along, thinking through how this ends up in IPVM as well, and separation of workflow as a expression of intent and the actual execution plan, right? The thing that gets actually scheduled, right? So actual schedule thing is UCAN invocation, right? And batch operation, a whole bunch of them, right? All of the stuff. But I think increasingly, and we were kind of trying to jam these two ideas together before, and having the separations, I think actually going to be really nice, of saying, hey, I don't necessarily have direct access to these things. I need the coordinator, or maybe I'll access my own coordinator, to go out to the network and say, hey, somebody needs to run this for me. I don't know who yet. And then that gets baked down into a scheduled plan, which is one or more invocations. That is an agreement. So basically the provider will hand you a capability that says, yep, this is a proof that I've said I will run this thing for you. And, at a certain, when we do payment at a certain price, and then it goes back. Which means that we need to clean up workflows a little bit, but I think this will clarify some parts in there that were we were feeling some tension between different use cases. So that's the long rambly version of the spec update.
Yeah, and so there's updates for UCAN invocation itself. There's UCAN promises has been split out, which is baked in the invocation before, but now it's just kind of referenced as a separate one. Obviously UCAN proper.
The rationale there. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
Sorry, I think I'm on a slight delay. The rationale for breaking some of these out, if you want to do invocations, you don't have to do promises. It's highly encouraged, but a common complaint people had was gut reaction. I don't need promises. And then, 3-4 months later, they'd come back and yes, actually need promises, right? So to get over that initial complaint, it's you know what? Here's invocations. It's really simple. You don't really have to think about it, right? It's a core part of the system. So you need delegations and invocations. And then if you want to do revocation and promises, those are over here. You should probably do those too. You don't have to, but we recommend that you do.
Yeah. And of course, for Homestar as an IPVM implementation, obviously we use promises because even if you're running a workflow on the machine that received a workflow or you're coordinating it elsewhere, you need to essentially wait for previous tasks because we're talking about groups of tasks and not just one. But UCAN invocations could just reference to one thing that you want to run, right? It has no concept of pipelines per se. Yeah, cool. Yeah, and those are all in review mode. So I'm guessing for people here, they can go and review if people want to take a look.
There's two pieces that still need to land. So the text is reviewable. I just haven't flipped them to RFR. Again, please review, right? haven't officially flipped into RFR because we need two pieces still. One is batch signatures, because we've moved from a batch envelope to a batch signature model. So we actually have to specify exactly how that works. We know how, like, the rough plan for that, but we need to actually specify this is the exact encoding. Here's the fields you need. Here's how they fit together, right? There's probably going to be some Merkle proofs in there as well. And the other one is JWT encoding. So we flipped the big switch, and this is a controversial move, to say, you know what, we're not going to maintain multiple different base encodings. Everything is IPLD, and we can encode IPLD as a JWT. It's a deterministic that canonicalized JWT, right? And that requires reshaping the data a little bit. So we just need to actually, again, write down exactly how that will happen, because we hear, and even I'm at a conference in Portugal right now, even people here are like, oh yeah, you know, I've been exploring UCAN, and like JWT like is a big draw. So we definitely have to support both, right? But flipping it around so that IPLD is the main thing means that we can get all of our nice semantics and schemas and all this stuff down one layer, and still expose it to developers as a JWT.
Yeah, I know Andrew, who's on this call, has looked at some of these stuff. Obviously, the Fission team has been reading and constantly we've been going through a lot of this. I think there's a lot of really good stuff because it's tying together delegation and invocation much closer. And you know, you can kind of see like there's a lot more true overlap now between I guess you would say the UCAN world and IPVM world. Even though we have separate meetings for these things, they're kind of becoming more entangled. The great entanglement in a good way. And so cool. Yeah, on the I guess I'll leave it up for any questions on that before we talk a little bit about some Homestar progress. And then we can open it up to everybody anyway.
Just one more comment, something that I'm seeing kind of out in the world. So both existing partners that were resistant to workflows originally, and again, at this conference, talking about things like factory automation and some other things. Yeah. Workflows keep coming up as a way of working, the thing that people actually want. So I think that's actually a good signal for the direction that we're going. Also had some side discussions today that looked very similar to what we've talked about in the past. Like, how do you do long-running things in a distributed way? Well, you need to re-enqueue yourself and then say, hey, I would like to run again, right? So this is a pattern that keeps coming up in other contexts as well. So I think we've kind of stumbled into, I'm not going to say it's the best thing, but it seems roughly correct. Right?
Yeah,
in the chat. Oh, I see.
Yeah, workflows are big business. I think you know, I think in previous calls and stuff, obviously, when I started on this, you know, looked a lot at, you know, temporal cadence, all the Microsoft stuff. But yeah, between step functions, really even using those terms as a whole, and AWS to, yeah, I mean, the term workflows and slash pipelines are essentially yeah, they're essentially every company now, maybe, but that's in a good way. It's like it's the direction that things are going, because it's not just about functions anymore, but how you kind of run a sequence of these things, or a coordinated version of these things. Cool. Yeah, on the Homestar front, I'll let Brian talk about. We've been a lot of the work internally, as we also prepare for a workshop in Turkey at Dev Connect, I think it's what it's called, right? And we're working on some stuff there for some more interesting kind of integrations for developers to work with in the workshop. But a lot of the stuff we've been doing internally is updating our test suite to be less flaky, you know, all that kind of on the ground stuff. And Brian's been doing a lot of great work in testing, multi-node testing the P2P. So you want to talk about that, Brian?
Yeah, you bet. Right. So workshop, you know, we're going to have a bunch of people in a room together on a LAN who will be running image processing workflows, which are similar to what we had in our earlier example, but it'll manifest a little bit differently. What we want to show is that somebody can run an image processing workflow that takes a long time and everybody else can run it and not have to do any work. Just go and get the results from the person who ran them in the first place. And then we also want to show that you can mix and match image processing steps and have different workflows. And so you can, take some advantage from work others have done, but you may have to do a little bit of work on your own. Yeah, as Zishan mentioned, I'm working on, just integration testing, making sure that all of our sort of multi-node connectivity things work, and discovery. On local network, we have available MDNS, presuming the venue's access point allows us to do that, or configured peers. And I'm also testing the rendezvous protocol, which I mentioned just earlier at the beginning of the call. And we also have Andy on the call, who's busy working on a dashboard, which will be sort of a dedicated single node dashboard to help you to see what's actually going on with your node. Did you get some results from another node from some other participants in the room? What's a sort of a convenient and easy way to create a workflow? Those who have looked at the workflow spec or actual workflow descriptions know that it's not something that humans should write by hand. So in the dashboard, there's going to be a workflow builder that will help to take functions that you know about and construct a workflow out of them. And so this workshop is going to be in November at IPFS Connect, and we're hoping to, put on a good time and get a bunch of features into Homestar along with that.
Yeah, I think obviously beyond the workshop, we'll have more interesting things to demo with this now, with the dashboard and the builder, and some interesting stuff we're doing with WebAssembly types on that side of it as well, to actually know what kind of types are part of a function. So really kind of building up and building those things through. We're also in the midst of Homestar getting kind of going through a release soon. I think they'll be going through official releases coming up. We have a lot of packaging already done, and like a homebrew install that will be tied to our releases and stuff like that. We're kind of coordinating all that right now, but all these kind of pieces are there, kind of in preparation for November, but for everyone else who want to play around with stuff going into that time. As part of all this work, I'm redoing kind of our server and JSON RPC interface. That's what I've been working on, and kind of lining all that up to be able to build an applications against Homestar, like our dashboard, which will ship with it. And that between that and testing has been really the focus there. Working with the Fission, working with the UCAN team as well, as we're looking at new versions and new things coming down the pipe. Philip, who's not on this call, him and I have already been discussing how we want to separate some stuff for their use of invocation from what is Homestar. So we will do a little bit of that probably in the next few weeks as well, in and around all the things we're getting ready with the dashboard and the workshop. So for the work we're doing there. And so, again, Homestar is, there's an example app that people can run today, but we're going to have more and more stuff. And when the dashboard's up, that would be really a great way to kind of see how receipts are, being reused. And this is really also coordinating with all the test work that Brian's doing, where we're testing essentially every possible edge case that could happen in the system, or at least we're hoping to. That's everything from our front, I think. So yeah, specs, code, runtimes. There's going to be probably some more specs coming down the pipe, because going into next year, a lot of the work is around coordination, which is why the UCAN invocation spec and delegation specs have really come through. And so as we've been reworking some UCAN library things as well with RSUCAN and going forward there. I think there'll be a lot of new stuff down the pipe where we prepare for, today Homestar is already a distributed engine in terms of how it uses the P2P and receipts, but now distributed coordination and distributed scheduling will come down the pipe. And that's really a big set of work for negotiating who should run what, which I think is a really big key for where we're going on the project. And it's pretty novel in the space, I would say. That's not tied to exact money from one company, you would say. Anyone on the call have anything else they want to bring up or they've looked at, or, obviously this is more general, or anything with the specs? Cool, thank you, Andrew. Decomplected, it feels like a rich hickey word. Think about
It really does. I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. Thanks. I'm glad it's helpful. Yeah. The thing that I keep coming back to with this is about a third of the previous spec is taken up by revocation, and people keep being like, "Well, you don't have a stripe for revocation." I'm like, it's a third of the spec. So now having it broken out, I can just link them to here's the entire thing, right?
Yeah, and we're going to be getting into a lot of these, coordination, internal coordination and integration points between all these libraries and stuff. So there'll be a lot coming down the UCAN pipe. Some stuff will be separated out at first, and then start moving their way into RSUCAN as we do that. And this will happen over the next into the end of the year and early next year. So yeah, I think for people who use UCAN away from IPVM or in other instances of work, I think you'll see so much more power between all the invocation stuff that we've used in Homestar coming outside, plus everything else that's being worked on. So I think for people working with UCAN, there's a lot of power as a library that will be there in future versions. And options, right? You don't have to do anything. You can pick the things you want to pick. You don't have to use promises. Cool. Becky linked the IPVM landing page. Yeah, cool. Yeah, and as I said, we'll be releasing. I mean, actually, we already have the brew install for people with Macs. We have deb packages that will go into the first release. Again, that will happen probably in the next few weeks here. And I think there is already a issues that we have to get ready for like a Windows WSL install that people can download, not through any official package managers, because that's a whole much more political step. But every release will be able to download all the stuff, and also through Homebrew. So that's all coming down the pipe, and we've already been testing that stuff internally. So, well, thanks to James from Fission, who's been putting in a lot of work on that front. Shout out. Whoop, whoop. Cool. Yeah. I think one thing from a community perspective, I'll say, is that, as we'll particularly, again, going into now that we have this dashboard that we're working on, we're doing a lot of prep work for like things around like a registry for functions. We're going to do a lot more, I think, general WASM tooling and WIT integration into different parts of the ecosystem. So there'll be a lot of discussion points there for people working in the space, that we can have through GitHub or on our Discord. And, as we get into distributed coordination, there'll be some more specs, I think, coming down the pipe, not only for workflows and IPVM, but, we've been building out this runtime and learning a lot through it. And so that will be part probably of a larger spec, especially as we get into distributed scheduling. So. NFX, or I guess not on-queues. I don't know if that's the right term to use for that.
I think they're just tasks at this point.
Tasks,
There's even the term on queue. Some people like it, some people don't. Maybe call it next. I don't know. Let's argue over field names later.
Yeah. We've also talked internally about we probably there's a as we start moving in this direction, there's a lot of work to think about in terms of like workflows that generate sub workflows. For how this gets distributed and run across, and then akin to some other workflow engines, things like creating child workflows or parent-child workflows where you have workflows that spawn other workflows on the fly. We've been talking about this a little bit toward having certain kinds of workflows around things like cron and stuff like that, that will that we're starting to spec out. So, Brent?
Could you say Brooke, could you say maybe a little bit about why on queues? Or I mean, like, what's the significance of an on queue, and how does it compare to thinking about effects before?
Yeah, sure. So it's identical, right? It's just a change in the name of the field. I found, depending on people's background, if they were pretty programming languagey, they would know exactly what it meant by an effect. They're like, yeah, sure, great. For everybody else, I was finding myself saying, well, it essentially on queues the next set of tasks. So I was like, why am I adding this layer of indirection, right? Initial feedback on that was positive from people that were confused by effect initially. Not everybody gets it still, right? So I don't know, maybe next, maybe something else. But the idea is that it's a request from the previous run for the next set of things to happen. So they have to get negotiated and actually picked up and executed. I think there's a distinction in here, though, between, again, a workflow that says, I would like these things to happen. I might not have the authority to, right? Versus, and, please go back and ask the user, versus actually handing a delegation into the runtime, right? Into the task as an argument, and maybe it has signature and whatnot, like as part of the workflow, so we can sign new ones and immediately spawn new ones. Great, totally allowed. And that's much more like an object capability way of handling this. For certificate caps, so slightly different, right? But in a OCAP system, you pass in all the resources you need, and if there's money involved, you'd also pass in as a capability, access to that. They call it a purse in the literature, and it would just immediately execute, right? So I think we probably want to break those out separately. So this is again the same thing I was saying before about invocation versus workflow having a slightly different meaning. I think it's kind of the same case again. It's like, should I ask or should I just immediately run with it? Because you've given me the ability to create new invocations.
Yeah, I think also, and tell me if I'm wrong, Brooke, but like a thing that comes up more, it used to be called effect, right? So typically when I think of on queues now, it's essentially like, after that task is run, please go run, please ask the network. I think you mentioned this, like ask the network if somebody will run these other things, but these other things are effects in the case of like, they are not necessarily tied to a sequence or a workflow of other things that might run. They're kind of their own thing that runs after that previous task has been done. So you could say it's almost like loosely coordinated, anybody who can take this up and run it. And also it's something like that would be akin to like send an email, notify someone, something like this, right? Versus the workflow, which is like, I need the input, or so the output from that previous thing to be my argument, to your point, right? Which is like, this is how this thing runs, versus like, yeah, that's why effects still makes sense to me. But to your point, I won't mention names, but even people who are well versed in distributed computing and databases get confused by the word effect, and so it is it causes issues.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about this case of workflow versus an invocation. If you want to be emitted from in a receipt, right? If you want to get really technical, those are effects and co-effects, or I guess the other way around, co-effects and effects, right? We are not going to use the word co-effect anywhere in the spec. Right? It's not going to happen. So I think the distinction is this is a thing that we want to get in the middle in the normal case. And it's not even just like, hey, who in the network can pick this up for me? It's like, do you want to propose this plan back to the user even and be like, hey, you said $10. we're out of the $10. Do you want to authorize this next set? It says it needs to send an email, and the user can be like, yeah, sure, send an email. The problem is that it could ask for anything. It could say, hey, to use the classic Haskell example, launch the missiles. Maybe not the greatest example given things geopolitically right now. But whatever the thing is, right? Send the email to everybody in my contacts list, and you kind of need somebody in the middle there to say like, well, no, you don't have access to my whole contacts list. I'm sorry, unless you've passed that into the previous step, in which case you've given it access to kind of on-queue everyone else inside of that level of authority.
So thinking of it from the effectful perspective, run the next workflow is in effect because it's happening outside of the workflow that you're in.
Yeah, exactly. So the core concept hasn't changed, it's just the field name, right? Gets updated. Words do change how you think about things, right? But yeah, the core intention, the semantics, the way it executes, all of that should be unchanged through this. And if on queue, which kind of feels like it's a push thing, it's like push it into the queue. We're currently thinking of it a little bit like a work stealing queue in that case, right? Maybe request would be better, maybe next. Not sure.
Yeah, I think and we've talked about this even when it was called effects. I think, in the first versions of Homestar, as we kind of explore this, if anyone else is implementing the spec, maybe they have other ideas here, but there's probably some restrictions of things that can kind of run in this shape, right? That you want to say ideas that, like a child workflow, to your point, Brian, is a good one, which it is a thing though, right? A child workflow is not the parent workflows. There is like some demarcation there of this thing running, or if it's like, more like a typical effect that's like IO, aka send something, make a call something and update some state somewhere. These are the kind of things where we probably start small, like our state effect, as we've talked about it for Homestar. But that's the kind of way we build it, right? Because it probably has to have some, its shape is very general in the spec, but probably from an implementation perspective, we want to make sure the runtime knows what it can handle for these kinds of things, right? But cool. And again, specs are open for people to chime in there. As we build out more and more stuff, as I said, when we have this workshop, we'll probably release more videos and stuff, and so hopefully more and more people will start getting being able to play around with things as we keep building this stuff out. All right. Should we call it early today? It is 6:32, I think, in the PM for Brooke. Yeah.
So. No, 5:32. Because I'm in
5:32. It's only 5 hours.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. Okay. Good. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess if anybody has other topics that they'd like to talk about, we can give the awkward 30-second pause and see if anybody can't restrain themselves. But otherwise, yeah, let's give people time back. Amazing. Thanks for the comment in chat. Yeah, and we should definitely talk more directly about getting quite involved, for sure.
Right.
All right. Great.
Cowabunga. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.